Welcome to Points of Interest, a video series brought to you by the Investor Protection Clinic at Osgoode Hall Law School and sponsored by the Law Foundation of Ontario. In this episode, we'll be discussing your options to report a wrongdoing and get compensation for financial harm that you might have suffered. There are a variety of different processes which may be suitable to address your complaint and multiple paths towards resolution. The courtroom is just one possible avenue to consider. To determine which process is right for you, we will help by outlining the relevant factors that you should keep in mind. First, we'll go over some best practices for financial record keeping. Second, we'll discuss what should be your first step, bringing your complaint to your investment firm or financial institution. Third, we'll introduce you to the regulators that you can contact if you are not satisfied with the response you receive from your investment firm or financial institution. We will also address engaging in a legal action as a last resort. Fourth, we will discuss the considerations that you should keep in mind while reporting a wrongdoing and seeking a remedy.
My name is Malcolm Gilroy, and I'm an investment advisor to the Investor Protection Clinic. It's very important to stay organized and review transaction summaries of your trades as they come in, and monthly account statements of your investments. Doing so will help you catch any issues sooner rather than later, and will be invaluable when you need to report a wrongdoing and seek a remedy. If you believe that your investments have been mishandled or that you have been financially wronged, an important step should be to perform your own self-evaluation. Begin by gathering and organizing the documents and statements related to the financial matter. Read them over and try to identify signs of the wrongdoing. Be sure to assemble as much hard evidence as possible. Copies of email conversations, notes of telephone calls, bank statements, investment account statements, and copies of transactions are always important when trying to work out what your actual losses are. It's important to have as much hard evidence as possible to present to the person helping you with your claim. If you're seeking monetary compensation, try to identify the dollar value of the loss you have suffered as accurately as possible.
Once you've gathered what you believe is evidence of a wrongdoing, your second step should be to start a complaint through the internal process of your advisor's firm. If your broker or advisor is a large institution, they will often have an internal ombudsman service or other office that will investigate your complaint. If your broker or advisor runs a small or solo practice, you may need to contact them directly with your complaint. In either case, put your complaint in writing and explain clearly, in detail, why you believe you were wronged. Be sure to indicate how you would like the situation to be resolved. If your advisor or investment firm requests documents, it is good practice to send a copy while holding on to any originals. If you feel that the response from this internal process is not appropriate, not satisfactory, or if you do not receive a response at all, you may decide to escalate your complaint by turning to the regulators or pursuing a legal action in the courts.
If your main focus is to get compensation for the harm you have suffered, there are at least 3 options for you to consider. The first 2 are alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, which we'd like to highlight. These are alternatives to launching a lawsuit in court, which can help you get compensation. First is the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada, or IIROC's, arbitration process. If the firm and individual providing you with advice is registered with IIROC and you are looking for less than $500,000 in compensation, then you can use this process to resolve your dispute. Though, keep in mind that you have 6 years from the date that you knew or ought to have known that the harm took place to use the IIROC arbitration process. IIROC has a membership list that is free to access and available online. Simply search for your broker or investment firm by name. Be sure to try multiple iterations of their name if you don't find them initially. A dash or space can change the search results. You should know that IIROC arbitration decisions are final and binding on both you and the opposing parties. One downside of the IIROC arbitration process is that both you and the other side have to pay the arbitrator's fee. The second option, which can award compensation for investors, is the Office of the Ombudsman for Banking Services, or OBSI. OBSI is able to recommend compensation up to $350,000. You can check online if the firm you are dealing with is registered with OBSI. If they are, and it has not been more than 6 years since you discovered, or ought to have discovered, the harm that took place, you can use OBSI's mediation process. The OBSI investigator's recommendation isn't binding on either you or the firm or advisor, but OBSI's recommendation is usually followed. And importantly, the OBSI process is free for investors to use. Please see the Points of Interest episode on navigating the OBSI complaint process for more information. If you decide that the IROC arbitration and OBSI mediation processes aren't for you, or if you are unsatisfied with OBSI's recommendation, you might still be able to take your claim to court. If your losses are $35,000 or less, then in Ontario, you can take the matter to small claims court. If the losses that you're claiming amount to more than $35,000, then you have to go to Superior Court. You don't need a lawyer to represent you at either level of court, but small claims court can be less formal and easier to use. The limitation period for starting a claim in civil courts is 2 years from the date you knew or reasonably should have known of the harm. And finally, you should remember that with either level of court, you might be responsible for some or all of the other side's legal fees if you lose your case. What if you aren't interested in getting compensation? You can still write a complaint letter to the securities regulator in your province or territory and/or to the regulator with whom the firm is registered. In Ontario, the local securities regulator is the Ontario Securities Commission. Depending on the type of firm and type of investment products, you can also consider submitting a complaint letter to self-regulatory organizations like IROC or the Mutual Fund Dealers Association, also known as the MFDA. Once a complaint is submitted, you may be contacted by the regulatory body for more details. You may also be asked to give evidence. While the complaint may lead to an investigation and ultimately sanctions against the firm or advisor, the process is unlikely to result in compensation being awarded to you. Visit the regulator's website for more detailed information on submitting your complaint. Finally, if you believe that you've been subjected to fraudulent or otherwise illegal behavior, you might consider filing a complaint with your municipal or provincial police.
As we bring this episode to a close, here are the key points of interest from reporting a wrongdoing and seeking a remedy. We discussed several different options that you can consider addressing the wrongdoing and the harm that you may have suffered. Each option has some pros and cons. The best option for you will largely depend on the remedy you're seeking, your financial constraints, and how much time has passed since you knew or reasonably ought to have known of the harm. When making your decision about what option to pursue, you should consider the following issues. First, what kind of remedy are you looking for? Do you want monetary compensation, or are you looking for sanctions to be imposed against the firm or advisor? Second, consider whether the end result of the process will be legally binding. A binding decision, which can be obtained through court or IROC arbitration, must be followed by both parties, and therefore it offers certainty that the decision will be followed. Third, consider the cost of the process. Reporting a wrongdoing to a regulator may be free, but it is unlikely that you will be personally compensated. On the other hand, a successful claim in a court would likely produce a monetary reward, but it can be very time-consuming, costly, and risky, especially if there is a chance you might lose and be responsible for the other side's legal costs. Fourth, consider the relevant limitation period for pursuing each option. In Ontario, the law requires that a civil action be commenced in the courts within 2 years of the date that the wrongdoing was discovered or reasonably should have been discovered. On the other hand, OBSI and IROC allow a longer 6-year limitation period.
The Investor Protection Clinic at Osgoode Hall Law School acts for investors who believe their investments have been mishandled and who cannot afford legal representation. The Investor Protection Clinic is the first clinic in Canada to offer free legal advice to retail investors. If you have any questions about the IPC's services, this episode, or any other episode in the Points of Interest series, please feel free to contact us.